Hello students, today we are going to be looking at section 1 of chapter 12. So this is the first set of notes that we'll be looking at in our new imperialism unit. So today in class you did your vocab for the new imperialism, so hopefully you're already familiar with some of these terms. I know we talked about an introduction to the unit, so I'm not really going to do that here. Let's just go on and dive into these notes. So today we are going to be, like I said, introducing some of the concepts for the new imperialism. And our big question for today is, how did Western nations come to dominate much of the world in the late 1800s? So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is look at the motives driving the new imperialism. This is one of our big things that we focus on in history, is cause and effect. So essentially these are the causes of imperialism. And the first one that we need to look at, in my opinion, is the most important, and that is economic. So I know that we're going very much out of order by doing chapter 12 and 13 right after chapters 7 and 9. And you may be thinking, she's a crazy lady, why are we skipping all over? Well, here's why we're skipping all over. Because this new imperialism, in my opinion, is a direct result of the Industrial Revolution. It's a direct result of capitalists and nations seeing how much money they can make with this new factory system. Well, guess what? You have to have two things in order to produce factory goods and make money off of it. You have to have the natural resources and the raw materials to make your products, and then you have to have somebody to sell those products to. And the new imperialism is going to give capitalists both of those things. So take a look at this map of Africa right here with me. This map has the most important natural resource from each country in Africa. So you can see iron ore, cotton, gold, oil, okay, grains, tea, gold, copper, all of these really important, clothing and textiles right there, okay. That was our major factory system industry, was the textile industry. So you can see that the capitalists of Europe are basically looking at the continent of Africa sort of like my dog looks at me when I'm about to feed her. She starts licking her lips and whining and being like, I know that you have something and I want it. And that's how the Europeans looked at Africa. They were licking their lips saying, you know, look at all those juicy natural resources. We can make so much money using those. Remember that one of our big industrial powers is Britain. They are a little bitty island. And so, you know, they don't have rubber resources. They don't have gold. They don't have oil. And so we see these European countries looking to Africa, looking to Asia, looking to Latin America to get the natural resources that they need to fuel the factory system. The other thing that they need is markets to sell these products to. If there is a group of people that has never before purchased factory-made cotton cloth before, but they are interested in doing so, and that's how you make a living, why would you not then attempt to sell it to them? It just makes economic sense. And so that's another thing that, you know, when the imperialists or when the capitalists are looking at the continent of Africa, once again we see them just licking their lips, you know, salivating, thinking about all the money they're going to make off of these people buying their stuff. And so that's going to be our major motive driving the new imperialism, is the economic motive from what the Industrial Revolution has changed about European economies. The next motive that we need to look at is military or political. So at this time we have had this big battleship arms race, and we'll talk about that more with the lead up to World War I. But basically all the countries of Europe are puffing up their chests trying to look like the biggest guy in the room, that they're the biggest, they're the toughest, they're the best. And we have these national rivalries that, you know, Britain and France kind of hate each other. France and Germany kind of hate each other. They're all sort of frenemies in a way, and they want to be better than the other. And they see, you know, getting these colonies as a way to basically add to their resume. They're padding their stats by getting these colonies, saying, nanny nanny boo boo, we're better than you because look at all this land in Africa we have. There's also the idea of the balance of power, though, that even though these guys kind of hate each other. Like we said, they're sort of frenemies. So they do want to make sure that they don't have an outright war. Spoiler alert, they will. It's called World War I. But at this point in time, they're still worried about maintaining the balance of power to try to keep the peace. So if Germany gets a new colony, France wants to get a new colony too, to make sure that that balance of power is maintained and none of them becomes stronger than the other. Our third motive is humanitarian or religious, and this comes from this idea of white man's burden. And that may be a term that you've heard before, but what we're really looking at when we say that is this idea that the Europeans had, that because they had the so-called blessings of Western civilization, they have the new technology, they have Christianity, they have all this material wealth, that they had a duty to go spread that knowledge and those blessings to what they considered to be the savages of Africa and Asia, that was their duty, their religious duty. And this term, white man's burden, comes from a poem by English writer Rudyard Kipling. And he's an interesting guy. He was born in India. He's actually the man who wrote the original Jungle Book story, like Mowgli and Baloo and Bagheera and all that. You may have watched that Disney movie when you were a kid. The real story has a much different ending. Anyways, he wrote a poem in 1899 called The White Man's Burden, and this is how it goes. Take up the white man's burden, in patience to abide, to veil the threat of terror, and check the show of pride, by open speech and simple, 100 times made plain, to seek another's profit, and work another's gain. The idea is, if you have been given these things, it's your duty to go spread them to people who don't have them. Sort of like Peter Parker's uncle tells him, with great power comes great responsibility. Okay, except the great responsibility is to go colonize people, so, a little different than saving New York, but we'll leave that to Spider-Man, I guess. Anyways, so our last motive is social Darwinism. And we talked about social Darwinism when we were looking at the Industrial Revolution. And remember that it's this idea that Darwin's survival of the fittest, that he was applying only to biology or to the animal kingdom. It's the idea that that also applies to human populations. So if you have one population of people, say Europeans, that go take over another population of people, say the people of West Africa, that wasn't a bad thing or that wasn't wrong, that was just the natural way of the world, that the Europeans were just more fit, and this is the survival of the fittest. So that same idea that when the red tree frog dies and the green tree frog lived because they lived in the green jungle, that's not cruel or that's not sad, that's just the way of nature. Well, the social Darwinists were applying that to human populations and to governments. And of course they saw themselves as the green tree frog in the jungle and saw the people that they were trying to take over as the red tree frog in the jungle. Because they believed that they were racially superior. So when a strong nation beats out a weak nation, they said, well, this isn't bad or wrong, this is just the way it's supposed to be. So those are our four motives driving the new imperialism: economic, military, political, humanitarian, religious, and social Darwinism. So let's move on to how the Europeans and then later the Americans and Japanese are going to be able to imperialize so successfully. And this part's kind of a no-brainer. There were some really significant non-Western weaknesses and some really significant Western advantages. So non-Western weaknesses, the great empires of Asia, the Mughal, the Ottoman, the Persian Empire, were all decaying right here at the end of the 1800s when this new imperialism is beginning. And so it kind of created the perfect storm for those people in that there was a power vacuum. One empire was on its way out, and the Europeans were on their way in pretty much at the same time. So the Europeans were able to take advantage of that situation. We looked with our Age of Exploration about how European exploration affected African states, that some of them it completely wiped off the map. These old trading kingdoms that had been around for centuries were just gone. due to European influence, and some new African states rose whose economies were based on the slave trade. Well, that's a pretty rocky way to base your economy, and those African states were really struggling. So same thing that we have in Asia. As those governments are on their way out, the Europeans are on their way in, and they take advantage of that power vacuum and fill it. Now, Western advantages, so you can see with all those technological advantages of the Industrial Revolution, the telegraph, the steamship, okay, some new weapons technology like the Maxim machine gun right here. This is going to play a huge part in World War I. It looks sort of funny, but you get the picture. All of those are going to help the West take over these other countries really, really easily. Repeating rifles, steam-driven warships, all of that. The people of Africa and Asia don't have those things. So when the Europeans roll in with their machine guns and start just mowing down people, there's not a whole lot that the natives can do about that. And so medical technology, they're able to go into the interior of Africa without getting sick because they have new drugs, and all of that we talked about with the Industrial Revolution basically creates the perfect opportunity for the Europeans to come in and kick butt and take names. The last thing we need to look at are some forms of imperial rule. So the first one is going to be direct rule and indirect rule. Direct rule is used mostly by the French, and we'll see what that looks like later. But with direct rule, you send officials and soldiers from the mother country to go administer the colony. And the goal is to impose your culture on the colony and turn it into a little version of your country. So you are trying to remake it in your own image, basically. So anyone who was in the government of that colony before you came in is out now. And you bring in your own people to govern, to impose the culture, to impose the economics, etc. Now, indirect rule is going to be used mostly by the British. And indirect rule is going to be pretty different from direct rule in that whoever was in charge of the country before still gets to be the ruler of the country. So the Sultan, the chief, whoever, still gets to govern the colony. But the British would then encourage the children of their local ruling class to get a Western-style education in Britain. And so basically what we see here is the British in India, for instance, grooming a new elite class that will rule the way that they want them to rule without having to directly rule over that country by westernizing them. Now, that doesn't mean that if things get hairy, they're not going to send in troops, because they totally will, and they totally do. We'll see that with India, but it is a little less strict with indirect rule. Now, the other two things we need to look at are a protectorate and a sphere of influence. A protectorate is not a colony at all. That area is still autonomous, it is still independent, but it has an advisor from the more powerful country pretty much whispering instructions in the ruler's ear all along, and making sure that what that country does is in the best interests of the bigger, more powerful country. Our best example of this is going to be Egypt and Britain. So a protectorate, the reasons you would do that, it costs less to run because you're not actually changing the administration of it at all. And there's also no military commitment. So that's mostly economic issues, that you don't have to pay soldiers to be there, and you're not having to build government offices and things like that. Now, the last thing we need to look at is a sphere of influence. And a sphere of influence is going to be different from these other forms of imperial rule because it is purely economic. It's not looking at government, it's not looking at culture, it is just about trading rights. If you've ever seen on a TV show, or maybe you've lived it in your life, two brothers or two sisters that share a bedroom, and they can't get along, they're all up in each other's space, so they draw a line down the middle of the room, and they say, this is my side and that is your side, you don't come on my side, I won't come on your side, and we'll be fine. And they're able to live in harmony with one another because they won't mess with each other. I wish I could have done that in my house with my brother growing up. He used to spit loogies in my sink and it was gross. Anyways, so this is kind of what a sphere of influence is doing with trading rights. Our best example is here in China. So you can see over here on our key that we have all these different countries, and they have exclusive trading rights in their respective areas denoted by the color. So here we have the British, and here we have the French. So the British are allowed to trade here in their sphere of influence. So we've got Shanghai, we've got Hong Kong, those are some really important ports. The British trade here, the French don't. Okay, what about down here? We've got Macau. That's a really important port for the French. The British are not allowed to trade in Macau. And so with a sphere of influence, the whole idea is to prevent conflict among Europeans. Just like our brothers and sisters that have to share the same room, all these countries are going to be here in China, and in order to keep from fighting each other for economic reasons, they decide that they'll each just stay in their respective areas. So that is a sphere of influence, and we will see that mainly with China. So that concludes our first set of notes for Unit 8. What I need you to do now is to get out the review sheet that I gave you at the end of class, complete it. I will check it tomorrow for a homework grade, and then we will go over it with our popsicle sticks. See y'all in class tomorrow.